Hello everyone, and welcome to this exciting event from the Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activities, or GEGSLA. My name is Saba Al-Shawa. I'm the GEGSLA Implementation Support Officer and the founder of the Jordan Space Research Initiative. Today, I'm honored to be the master of ceremony for this event as we embark on a journey that not only touches the surface of the moon, but also reaches for the stars in terms of global impact. We find ourselves at a pivotal moment in history where the worlds of space exploration and sustainable development are converging. As we gather here at the United Nations Science Summit with the UN General Assembly and the SDG Summit running in parallel, we aim to reflect on the important relationship between space exploration and the ambitions that we hold for humanity here on Earth. Our ultimate goal in this session is to engage both the space and non-space communities in a conversation that aims to resonate with every individual. You may be wondering, especially if you are not part of the space industry, why should you care about sustainable lunar activities? Well, the answer to that question is what we're hoping to address here today by highlighting the different ways that lunar activities relate to sustainability here on Earth. As we navigate through today's event, please take a moment to reflect on the potential connections between lunar exploration and the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Today, we will explore these intersections and uncover how sustainable lunar activities can potentially contribute to addressing some of the most pressing challenges faced by humanity. Our agenda today is packed with insights, discussions, and opportunities to explore the intersections between the GEGSLA, its framework, the UN SDGs, and the upcoming Summit for the Future. We'll hear from various experts in the field, and I can assure you that the perspectives shared today will leave you feeling inspired and thoughtful about the future of lunar exploration. Before we dive into our discussions, I'd like to highlight some important logistical points. Please leave your microphones muted for the duration of the event to ensure a smooth experience for all of the participants. If you have any questions or comments throughout the event, please utilize the Q&A option here on Zoom. We will be monitoring the audience questions throughout the event and addressing some of them during the dedicated Q&A session later in this event. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Giuseppe Ribaldi, who is the Executive Secretary of GEGSLA and President of the Moon Village Association. He is going to set the stage for our discussion by talking about the MVA and the motivation behind GEGSLA. Giuseppe, over to you.
Thank you, Saba, and I'm going to start showing, and I think you can see probably my presentation. So first of all, thank you to Saba for basically being the master of ceremony and being major important part of this event. So good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So I'm going to show you briefly what is the Moon Village Association in case some people do not know, because it is the Moon Village Association which is organizing this event. So let me start by explaining what is the Moon Village Association. So the Moon Village Association is an NGO which has been created in 2017, registered in Vienna. The goal is to foster the implementation of the Moon Village. That means to create cooperation and collaboration between several stakeholders. We will examine which one are those stakeholders. The organization is a member of International Astronautical Federation, and most relevant for today is a permanent observer at United Nations COPUOS, as well as in ECOSOC. So the goal of the organization is to acting as a platform to bring together stakeholders coming from industry, government, space agency, international organization, NGO, and last but not least, the public. So right now we have about 800 individuals with about representatives from 64 countries, and you can see the statistic over there. It is a catalyst which stimulates a virtual, let's say, cycle of investment for the development of the lunar economy. And we have, therefore, individuals as well as institutional members, which can be space, basically, space industry as well as institute. So what you can see here is just an example of some of our institutional members. So you can recognize some major aerospace company like Lockheed Martin, OHB, but there is a number of other organizations which are also university as well as other NGO. So basically, I'm going to explain very briefly, in view of the time, and it's not the main focus of today's event, the palette of activity which the organization is involved. So you can see a lot of activity, and of course we are not going to dwell on all them. You will be able to look more in detail on the Moon Village Association webpage, where you can find more detail. But the main message is the organization range from a cultural activity. As you can see, there is a cultural consideration to economics, lunar commerce and economics, to the young generation, towards the Moon Village generation, analog activity, participation of a space country, architectural concept, coordination and cooperation, as well as International Moon Day. So I'm going to basically explain very briefly some of them. And so particularly I will start with the Moon Village 2045 reference definition. As you all know, Artemis and ILS, International Lunar Research Station, are the two main programs leading to the moon. But right now, there has been never an organization which has put together all different building blocks which will be required by a future Moon Village, meant a number of infrastructure from different countries. So the architecture working group had made a reference definition study led by John Menkins, the vice president, and he has gone in detail to explain what are the building blocks and how those building blocks could fit with each other. What you can see there is a representation of a landing within one of the South Pole craters, which is the bay where the possibility of a lunar Moon Village is going to be located. We have also involvement in economics. And so the economics basically is related to what is the potential of the lunar market. So there has been a very detailed study, more than 200 pages, which have been working, the Lunar Commerce and Economic Working Group, which has published last year in December, the Lunar Commerce Portfolio. And there you can see a lot of this information about lunar market. Let me go now to the next one, which is the Lunar Coordination Cooperation, which is actually the topics of today. I'm going to just give a short breakdown because the next speaker is going to go much more in detail and explaining what is the GEGSLA. The issue is the organization has realized since some times is that we are going to have an increasing number of governmental and non-governmental missions to the moon with commercial, scientific, and other goals. Right now, beside the space treaty, which most of you know, which is called Corpus Juris Spatialis, there is no coordination mechanism for lunar activity. And this is, of course, a very serious challenge to the sustainability and safety of the future mission and the lunar environment. So that is, at the moment, is a gap which needs to be, let's say, covered and needs to be closed. And so that is the reason the organization felt important to set up a mechanism which will mitigate creation of debris in lunar orbit. You know the problems that we have in Earth orbit with debris. We will try to avoid and to make something better on the moon as compared to Earth. And also, it's very important the possibility to exchange information and it means of interoperability. So for that reason, in February 2021, the Moon Village Association decided to create the Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activity. And I stop there because the next speaker will speak more in detail about that. A few words about some of the other activity. So it's very important that the lunar activity are not only for the rich country, the country which have large budget, but we feel that since it is the next step of humanity, we need to involve as many countries as possible. Therefore, the General Assembly, which is started Sunday, is a good example. We have about 200 countries, not as many are involved in space and lunar activity. We hope that more they will. So this project is stimulating countries not, as I said, very well knowledgeable about lunar activity. And you can see the name of some of these activity, and what he's doing, basically the MVA is creating a capacity building in those countries and motivate them with specific projects. And indeed, Jordan, as Saba said, is one of those countries, as you can see on the map, which has been participating and are now initiating some of those activities. A few words about the other activity, culture. So we have organized a lot of cultural activity. You can see some of them, which range from art to basically engineering, but mainly in the area of also architecture. And also we have been dealing recently on the deep space effect. All of that you can find on the website. Then the organization is located all over the world, as you heard, and we have what we call global network. So there are 50 national coordinators. You can see some of these you can see on the map. And this allows people to organize events related to the MBA in a very much complementary way to the Space Generation Advisory Council. I now would like to mention a few words about the International Moon Day. Indeed, the Moon Village Association proposed to the United Nations the creation of the International Moon Day. And we were lucky enough, not only ourselves, but the rest of the world, that this was approved in December of 2021 to observe every year on 20th of July, basically the International Moon Day. The goal is to commemorate basically not only the first landing on the moon in 1969, but also all other spacefaring nations which had lunar activity. It is a moment where around the world, people organize in a similar way to the Space Week, basically event related to the public or to industry to explain the challenges and the benefits of lunar activity. So in 2022 was the first year. We are in the second year, and you can see that the map there, we had 46 events around the globe with the participation of 42 countries. And hopefully this is going to grow and you will be participating in one of them. Very important for the organization is towards the Moon Village generation. So we have a lot of activity for the young. The Moon Village and many activities related to the moon are belonging to the future generation, humanity, and that's what we try to do. We have been also partnering with space organizations like ISRO to have video competition, and there is a lot that you can find on the website. We also have a student corner where basically people can request questions to the expert of the Moon Village Association. So with that, and with the last chart about the website, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I hope to have an excellent event. And thank you, Saba, back to you.
Thank you, Giuseppe, for the overview of the MVA. We will now hand it off to our next speaker, Ian Christensen, who is going to tell us a bit more about GEGSLA specifically and the GEGSLA framework. Ian, over to you.
Yeah, good day, everyone. Let me take a moment to share my screen here. That should be. If I could just, Saba, if you could just tell me that the presentation is showing clear?
Yes, perfect.
All right, very good. So again, good day. My name is Ian Christensen. I am the Director of Private Sector Programs at an NGO known as the Secure World Foundation. Secure World Foundation is a US-based organization that focuses on the sustainability of the space environment. And why do we focus on the sustainability of the space environment? Because of the benefit that space applications and services provide here on Earth. And so it's an honor to present at the Science Summit today on the margins of the larger SDG Summit, because the SDGs, of course, are a very important set of goals to which space applications and services we think provides a critical component of achieving those goals. So as Saba and Giuseppe have mentioned, I am here to give an overview of the GEGSLA work and the recommended frameworks and key elements for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities that resulted from that work. In the context of GEGSLA, I was a member and I served as a part of a team that was responsible for taking the input from our various members and the working processes of the GEGSLA group and producing the draft of the recommended framework then for review and consensus building within our membership. So Giuseppe already kind of introduced the overall motivations behind GEGSLA, so I'm not going to belabor this slide, but I think the point to mention here is that over the next decade or so, we're looking at forecasts and plans for somewhere between 100 to 150 lunar missions. So those are missions from governments, those are missions from commercial entities, those are in some cases even missions from nonprofit or academic institutions. And so we're seeing a wave of interest and a wave of lunar activity that is fundamentally different from our experience in the Apollo program and in the Soviet lunar program of the 1960s and in the somewhat sporadic missions we've had since then. This is really a sustained return to the moon. It's a return to the moon for science purposes. It's a return to the moon for human exploration and ultimately long-term presence. It's a return to the moon for commercial presence. And it's a return to the moon that's for sustained and long-term activities. So that's a nature of the use of the moon that will require coordination, will require interaction, will require a lot of exchange between different stakeholders, a lot of balancing of different interests, and an extension and further development of legal policy and operational principles to ensure that that activity occurs safely, sustainably, and most importantly, produces benefits to society and to humanity as a whole. So that's the kind of motivational context behind GEGSLA. And so I want to start with a little bit of just background on how GEGSLA operated, and then I'll go into what the recommended framework itself says. So GEGSLA's objectives were to leverage contributions from space agencies, companies, and international organizations to develop these principles. It was to involve the public by promoting outreach efforts and to serve as a platform to exchange information and views within the lunar community and the space community on key issues for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities. And so I want to emphasize a few points there, right? It's a very interdisciplinary group, space agencies, companies, academia, international organizations. There's a public element to it. There's an information exchange element to it. And we also sought to support and provide potentially input into some complementary activities which are already going within the UN framework, including within the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, discussions of space resources, governance and utilization activities, and discussion of long-term space sustainability guidelines. So GEGSLA worked for a 2-year period, and in February of 2023, we released our recommended framework and key elements for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities. And for shorthand, I'll just refer to that as the recommended framework going forward. As Giuseppe mentioned, the Secretariat was hosted by the MVA. GEGSLA members, some members were MVA members, but the membership was a broader base, and members in GEGSLA were from outside of MVA as well. We met for a 2-year period, held primarily virtual meetings. The recommendations and supporting material that I talk about were primarily developed through 4 subgroups on information sharing, on safe lunar operations and lunar environmental protection, on compatibility and interoperability in lunar activities, and on responsible governance. So over approximately 16-month period or 14-month period, those working group or those subgroups developed recommendations. Us in the drafting group took those and put them into a report, and we reviewed that within the plenary. We then issued a public consultation period, gathered feedback from the broader lunar and space community and public community to produce the final recommended framework. I've mentioned the membership, but I really want to pause on this point. So it's a cross-sectoral membership, government, industry, academia, and cross-disciplinary. So we had legal and policy experts, we had technical experts, scientific experts, we had experts in heritage and lunar and environmental protection, and we had, as I said, space agency and industry representatives. And we also had a very global group. So the global nature of GEGSLA was a key element. You can see that the countries represented. We had in the membership 37 experts from 24 countries, and the broader observer participants were another approximately 200 from more than 40 countries. And as GEGSLA has transitioned into the second phase, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that distinction between members and observers has kind of faded away, and we have a much broader participant base in the current GEGSLA. So the recommended framework aims to be a guide for well-balanced lunar projects, covering a number of key elements, including safe and sustainable lunar activities through norm building, its coordination and management. Those principles build on what we have in existing international space law, the treaties and multilateral agreements, as well as guidelines that we have, extends those principles into a framework that we hope will effectively facilitate dialogue and cooperation among the multitude of lunar stakeholders that I've already mentioned, aims to promote and provide transparency, accountability, and certainty for lunar stakeholders. And I think this next bullet is, in my view, one of the more important ones, right? We do realize that this should be a living document. We're focused on the near and medium terms, but as society and our community builds.
Not sure who paused the recording. Please go ahead.
Okay, that seems it's back. So as I was saying, this should be a living document. In the near term, we've set out some recommended principles and some key elements, but we do recognize that as experience builds, we should iterate and review those principles and take into account operational experience. So we see this as an adaptive process that will learn and grow as we build an experience. So the recommended framework has 11 chapters. The first 4 chapters are what we refer to as principles chapters. So they set out the objective, define the key terms that we use throughout the document, provide the orientation and reference to the existing legal norms that apply to lunar activities. And then we have an extensive discussion of coordination and management, because we do see within the GEGSLA that coordination of lunar activities across different stakeholders and across different types of activities is going to be a core principle that it should inform most of the key elements that we then discuss. So within the coordination chapter, for instance, there's a real emphasis on transparency and inclusion in lunar operations, and it recognizes the essential nature of coordination to enhance safety, promote cooperation, and encourage interoperability in lunar activities. Following those principles chapters, we then have chapters 5 through 11 that are the key elements for sustainable lunar activities. Those cover information sharing, safe operations in lunar environmental protection, interoperability, responsible governance, benefits for humanity, the sustained lunar economy, and human interaction in lunar activities. So in each of these key element chapters, the framework defines the intent for those elements and sets out recommendations that can be implemented by lunar stakeholders. For example, in Chapter 6, Safe Operations in Lunar Environmental Protection, that chapter recognizes there will be a need to consider a balance among the interests of environmental protection, scientific research, heritage management, and commercial viability in lunar activities. It sets out measures to encourage avoidance of adverse changes to the lunar environment and to avoid harmful interference to other lunar activities. In those elements, within Chapter 6, the recommended framework addresses safety zones for lunar operations, protection and management of lunar heritage, and lunar debris mitigation and environmental sustainability, as well as discussion of sites of scientific interest. So this cross-cutting balancing of different interests, balancing of different types of sustainability concerns is really key to the recommended framework. And so within the time I have, I don't have the time to go into all the other chapters, but I kind of want to mention Chapter 6 there is just kind of an example of how the document works. In addition, there are additional annex documents. So the recommended framework itself is presented as a consensus outcome of the GEGSLA process. But through the work, we developed additional supplemental material that go deeper into issues or provide discussion without achieving recommendations or consensus. And we do make those available in the interest of transparency and the interest of building that operational expertise and practice that I mentioned. So those cover some technical and operational practices and case studies for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities, and just a list of future issues for sustainable lunar activities that were developed during the process, but we didn't feel that were sufficiently mature or defined to be able to produce recommendations around. And then there are also supplementary documents that provide references on cultural heritage management, lunar natural heritage management, and environmental assessment. So GEGSLA, in its first phase, it did produce the recommended framework, the project that we're briefing out today and that we have been presenting at other forums. But GEGSLA continues in an operational phase. So we do recognize that exploring and using the moon will present challenges and opportunities even that we don't recognize now. So that we'll need a forum to continue the discussion. And we'll hope that the recommended framework is the baseline for that next steps forward in discussion of those issues. We recommend the recommended framework to the attention specifically of UN COPIOS, but other forums as well for further discussion and deliberation. And we do remain open and ongoing as a informal consultation group for further development of lunar coordination principles and gathering experience from those ongoing missions. So there are currently 3 ongoing GEGSLA working groups. The first one focuses on lunar environmental protection, which is focused on implying the meaning of harmful contamination in the lunar context and developing recommendations for safeguarding scientific, cultural, and aesthetic factors of the lunar environment as we use that environment more. The second group focuses on lunar technical coordination, so working to build coordination and information exchange between lunar operators for enhancing safety in lunar activities. So that's really trying to take in industry and space agency experience with lunar operations and kind of verify the elements of the recommended framework and then build in that experience in practice. And then the third working group focuses on multi-stakeholder coordination. And this is really about building the policy level coordination framework or ability between states at the multilateral level. So with that, I think that concludes my presentation. So thank you, and I look forward to questions and over to you,
Thank you
Saba.
very much, Ian, for this overview of the GEGSLA framework. As Ian mentioned, we are now in the operational phase, and GEGSLA is open to more participants. I will be sharing later in the event the link for you to express interest in joining. And with that, I will hand it over to the chair of GEGSLA, Dumitru Dorin Pruneriu, who's going to tell us more about how the GEGSLA framework links within the UN framework as well as the UN Policy Brief 7. Over to you, Dorin.
Yes, hello to everyone. Hello, Saba. Thank you for introducing me. I will continue with a few elements that Jan stressed a few minutes ago. And then I will go to the UN work together with the Space Development Goals and our involvement as GEGSLA. The exploration and utilization of the moon, it's a unique chance for humanity, for major technical, economical, as well as cultural development. And it's a major contributor to solve many of the challenges on Earth. The Moon Village Association, it's a global organization with involvement of multi-stakeholders from government, space agencies, industry, academia, international organizations, and the public from more than 60 countries, created to foster cooperation for the peaceful exploration and utilization of the moon. The Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activities, or GEGSLA, composed of members from space agencies, government, industry, international organizations, NGOs, universities, and research centers, was organized in the framework of MVA to promote development of a neutral forum for multi-stakeholder discussions on lunar exploration, as Jan also stressed a few minutes ago. The report recommended framework and key elements for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities, together with 2 annexes, is the result of a 2 years work of GEGSLA. It provides guidelines to lunar stakeholders for planning their lunar-related projects and activities, and contributes to the ongoing discussion under the auspices of the UN on promoting international space governance. The report defines lunar governance as a dynamic and interactive process with multi-stakeholder involvement and proposes an adaptive framework to achieve lunar governance. To operationalize such a framework, it highlights fundamental principles to follow and recommended balancing different values and aligning multiple goals through information sharing, coordination, and innovation. It also suggests a progressive approach towards establishing full-scale lunar governance, starting with the lunar environment and sustainable lunar activities as priorities. The GEGSLA members are confident that recommended framework document and its subsequent practices by lunar stakeholders will provide a baseline for UN COPUOS and other entities within the UN family to develop international space governance. In its operational phase, beginning from early 2030, GEGSLA establishes working groups to verify and further develop the norms and practices embodied in the recommended framework document, with focus on industry, academia, and policy-making sectors, and plans to submit a concrete proposal for UN COPUOS to consider in 2024. The possibility to create, with the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, as Secretariat, an international committee on lunar operations, similar to International Committee on Global Navigation Satellite Systems, it's also investigated. The GEGSLA framework document is linked and needs to be considered as an important contributor to the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and as well as a case study for the Summit of the Future to be organized in 2024 by the UN for Space Governance. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and in the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The GEGSLA framework stands as a pivotal instrument that closely aligns with several of the UN SDGs, reflecting its commitment to fostering responsible lunar endeavors while addressing key global challenges. With respect to SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, the GEGSLA framework is closely intertwined with this development goal, striving for decent work and economic growth in the context of lunar activities. For example, Chapter 10, Sustained Lunar Economy, contributes to economic development and decent work opportunities, reflecting the essence of SDG number 8. With respect to SDG number 9, Industry, Innovation and Infrastructure, the GEGSLA framework significantly resonates with this development goal, fostering innovation and infrastructural development. Chapter 5 of our document, Information Sharing, Chapter 6 of our document, Safe Operations and Lunar Environmental Protection, and Chapter 7, Interoperability, advocate for sharing knowledge and ensuring safe practices, contributing to innovation and sustainable infrastructure in lunar activities. With respect to SDG 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, several chapters within the GEGSLA framework directly intersect with this development goal. Chapter 3, International Legal Norms for Lunar Activities, and Chapter 4, Coordination and Management, emphasize the establishment of legal frameworks and coordination mechanisms, ensuring peace and just conduct of lunar activities. Moreover, Chapter 8, Lunar Governance, contributes to building strong institutions for lunar affairs, enhancing transparency and accountability. This alignment is crucial for maintaining global harmony and preventing conflicts in space exploration, as highlighted by the SDG number 16. The Summit of the Future, scheduled for September 2004, emerges as a transformative opportunity to strengthen international collaboration and address critical global challenges. Its overarching goal is to bridge gaps in global governance, reaffirm commitments to the SDG and the United Nations Charter, and pave the way for a more revitalized multilateral system that can positively impact the lives of people worldwide. The rise of private space enterprises, coupled with advancement in technology, has ushered in a new era of space exploration characterized by unprecedented opportunities and challenges. The synergy between the GEGSLA framework and the forthcoming Summit of the Future, it's a testament to the comprehensive approach to address global challenges and shape a sustainable future. as Summit of the Future converges on the principles of international collaboration and responsible governance, the relevance of the GEGSLA framework becomes more apparent, particularly in its alignment with the UN SDGs and the UN Space 2030 agenda. The GEGSLA framework underscores sustainable practices in lunar activities, emphasizing environmental stewardship, international cooperation, and economic sustainability. These parallel visions with Summit of the Future reflect a shared commitment to weaving sustainability into diverse domains, where the GEGSLA framework intricately mirrors the core themes of Summit of the Future. Within this context, the UN Policy Brief 7, titled For All Humanity, The Future of Outer Space Governance, becomes increasingly relevant. Released by the United Nations Secretary General, this policy brief outlines the need for a comprehensive framework for the governance of outer space activities. It recognizes the potential of space exploration to contribute to sustainable development while underscoring the importance of responsible conduct and equitable distribution of benefits. The policy brief emphasizes the necessity of international cooperation, transparency, and ethical considerations in shaping the future of space governance. The policy brief echoes themes present in the GEGSLA framework, aligning with its principles such as international cooperation, environmental protection, and the equitable distribution of benefits from lunar activities. The GEGSLA framework, by aligning with the SDGs and aiding the development of global lunar governance, reinforces its significance in shaping a sustainable future. Its principles and guidelines not only provide a blueprint for responsible lunar activities, but also exemplify the collaboration and forward-looking thinking endorsed by Summit of the Future. As both initiatives strive to establish a more harmonious world, the integration of space exploration and sustainable development becomes a necessary reality, paving the way for a future that benefits all of humanity. In conclusion, the framework document is an important contribution offered to the United Nations and lunar community at large to initiate a conversation on international lunar coordination and identify a way forward that is effective and fast, considering the urgency of de-risking future lunar activities. The framework can be used also as an example of a specific space governance issues, as advocated by the Summit of the Future, and could support an acceleration of the international discussion on lunar cooperation. Finally, GEGSLA operational phase is continuing in 2024 and beyond, and it will act as a technical support for the global discussions about lunar cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Doran, for this great overview, presenting some of the potential links with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Summit of the Future, as well as the UN Policy Brief 7. So as you can see from what our speakers have presented so far, there are many synergies between sustainable development, sustainability here on Earth, and sustainability on the Moon, which makes it of utmost importance for everyone to get involved in the area of sustainable lunar activities. It is not just limited to people in the space industry because it does impact everyone here on Earth. So with that, I thank all of our speakers for the initial portion of our session. I hope that our attendees are reflecting on some of the things they've learned. We are going to be taking a brief 10-minute break before we head into the next portion of our event today, which is the panel discussion that will also be moderated by our chair of GEGSLA, Doran. So I remind everyone again to please, if you have any questions, to put them in the Q&A box on Zoom. We will be monitoring this throughout the session, so your questions can be directed to any of our previous speakers as well as during the panel discussion. With that, we will start our 10-minute break and meet back here shortly. Thank you again. Welcome back, everyone. We will now move forward into the next session, which is the panel discussion. So I invite all of our panelists to join us. As I mentioned, this panel will be moderated by Doran, and it will largely reflect the topics that he mentioned of how the GEGSLA framework ties in with the UN SDGs, the Summit for the Future, and how we can bridge together these two areas. So with that, I hand it off to Doran.
Thank you, Saba. Hello, everyone, once again. Please join me in welcoming for this panel Stuart Clark, representing the Earth Space Sustainability Initiative, a UK-based initiative which recently published its Space Sustainability Principles with 130 signatories, including the MVA. Alice Gorman is an associate professor at Flinders University in Australia, faculty at the International Space University, and vice chair of academia in the GEGSLA. Jean-Claude Worms, executive director of COSPAR, the Committee on Space Research, as well as co-chair of the GEGSLA Working Group number 1, Lunar Environmental Protection. And also we have a video recording from Simonetta Di Pippo, former director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs and current director of the Space Economy of Evolution Laboratory at SDA Bocconi. She will be first. Following her insightful message, also our panelists will join us to explore the intersection between the GEGSLA framework, the UN SDGs, and the Summit for the Future. Now, without further ado, we'll now play the video from Simonetta Di Pippo before driving into our discussion.
Welcome, everyone. Allow me to start thanking you for the invitation to participate in this panel with so many high-level experts to discuss such an important topic. As some of you may know, the seek of new governance schemes for sustainability and safety are themes of utmost importance to me. These days, I believe it is crucial to stimulate and deepen this kind of discussions, since the future of space and of our society strongly depends on what we will be able to decide and to do in these very years. In this regard, the consideration of the GEGSLA recommended framework for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities is a great opportunity to discuss concretely about something that is already on the move. And it's not only about good intentions and great words, but it is indeed about active actions and concrete suggestions. The new challenging lunar venture, of which we are witnessing now the first steps, is certainly a remarkable possibility to test whether we can be up to the task on the challenges that lie ahead of us. A new governance regime, renewed and improved relations between states, and the push for a peaceful development of outer space activities are all elements that find perfect applicability in the context of the return to the moon. The great attention that the United Nations are putting into this debate is under everyone's eyes. Through the numerous policy interventions undertaken in recent years, the UN are showing the way to embark on a process to guarantee a successful and peaceful development of space activities, so increasingly important for everyone's life now and in the future. In my opinion, this route travels through three fundamental stages. First, to ensure that every space activity is and will be programmed to be completely sustainable. Second, to find and adopt new governance schemes able to guarantee both the sustainability and the security of space operations for today and tomorrow. And third, to jointly cooperate for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda's goals and to further contribute to that heritage in the future. For sure, these three challenges are anything but trivial to overcome. As it often happens, the consideration of individual interests and benefits may in many ways hinder the fruitful development of joint initiatives, even if they are of utmost importance. However, I think that in this case, we should pay even more attention than usual to the opportunities at stake. Given the economic magnitude that space, and in particular the space economy, is gaining over the whole globe, and with an incredible rapid path in the most recent years, and everything seems to suggest that this is only the beginning, the way in which we will answer to the questions above will likely determine our future in a more concrete way than ever happened. And with the word future here, I mean several aspects: our economy, society, politics, and even our culture will be heavily impacted by this new space age. If we then add the strategic, political value that the space sector has always had for every country, discussions like the ones we are having in this panel become fundamental pillars of the future we want to build. For these reasons, I believe that the effort of independent organizations like the Moon Village Association or the Space Economy Evolution Lab that I'm happy to lead may turn out to be decisive as a support to the objectives and actions of the United Nations. Entities that are more easily unaffected by national, political, and strategic interests have the duty to strongly push all other actors towards new settings for governance, research, and exploitation of space. And let me say that, as I said at the beginning, I'm very happy to notice that something big is already moving in this direction. I'm of course referring once again to the GEGSLA recommended framework for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities, which I believe to be a magnificent proof of the kinds of studies and recommendations useful for the space progress we want to witness in the future. Well, allow me to reflect a little bit more. And first of all, allow me to say that this work, even if is focused on a specific theme, may well serve as a pilot project for every kind of space venture when a series of recommendations for improved collaborations are needed. The lunar governance model traced in the framework is a very good one. And it's also a first step towards the creation of a new governance model for space as a whole, since it involves and considers all interested stakeholders. It addresses governance issues by suggesting regulatory indications across all actors. It contemplates the industrial actors at the global level by asking for guaranteed standard for interoperability of space assets. It points at the importance of involving emerging and developing countries for theirs as well as everyone's benefit. And finally, it opens the doors to the participation of terrestrial, let's call it terrestrial, non-space companies and sectors, opening new markets and reinforcing old ones. Each and any of these themes has a clear goal, a precise scope, and a direct reference audience, elements that make the document useful for a variety of stakeholders. But of all the aspects considered, I value three more than others. The first, the approach and proposals on the regulatory side. The second, the information sharing as a best practice. And third, last but not least, the conceptualization of how the lunar activities might be managed. I say these three elements because I think they are iconic of the approach that GEGSLA has adopted in the development of its framework. On the normative side, I strongly agree on the fact that a new regulatory framework will need the assessment of new modern norms on one side and of a reference institution able to manage this whole set of new rules and of this new governance approach on the other. Without any doubt, this reference entity should be nothing different than the United Nations themselves, because the assurance of an effective application or what will be developed, well, may be guaranteed by the only institution that has strived to maintain the peaceful uses of outer space since day one, I would say also day zero. Coordination and management will indeed be the two magic words guaranteeing the success of this new endeavor. Moreover, within the context of the United Nations, all actors feel involved, and this will clearly help a cooperative and a thoughtful approach. Well, in addition to that, I also believe that the sharing of information is one of the strongest pillars of every cooperation agreement. And in the peculiar case of the lunar venture, it becomes even more important, well, due to the technical difficulties and the economic obstacles that feature this kind of activity. And indeed, and very importantly, the GEGSLA framework explicitly mentioned that this information sharing is meant valid under all aspects of a lunar activity. So operations, science, lesson learned, and other possibilities like natural hazards. This holistic view has to be preserved. It has to be the guiding light of our efforts. Well, also, I think that it is fundamental to consider a new management model for the lunar ventures. By that I mean a new approach on how to lead and manage this endeavor. And on this regard, the framework mentions that the development of lunar activities should guarantee their sustainability, involve interested developing countries, and involve also terrestrial actors, so non-space actors. On the first one, so we all know how much the sustainability topic is considered in the current debates. A system is sustainable when it's able to ensure the fulfillment of current needs while safeguarding the ability of future generations to satisfy their own. Well, to make a lunar activity sustainable means not to be greedy in its exploitation, but instead to adopt an approach of enjoyment of the lunar resources instead of abuse. This involvement of both developing countries in non-space actors and sectors finally greatly connects the framework to the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals. I indeed believe that both elements are crucial to rapidly progress on the route of the SDGs achievement. Developing countries may give an enormous contribution to the goals, both because of their technical current needs, for instance, clean energy or the support to sustainable cities development, and for the great trends in economic and social progress. On the other side, terrestrial industries behold expertise, financial solidity, credibility, and a great ability to open and manage new markets. It is crystal clear how their involvement could give a huge help to the development of the lunar exploitation programs and of the lunar economy, both in terms of operational and technical performance, and in terms of visibility, credibility, and marketing of the lunar economy. Well, concerning these, allow me to express my satisfaction for the collaboration that the Space Economy Evolution Lab has established with the Moon Village Association. We indeed wrote a paper together on the involvement of non-space industries in the lunar economy. The title is the Lunar Economy Solely for the Space Industry? And in this paper it is showed how the only possible answer to this question is certainly not. This paper will be presented for the first time at ISC 2023 in Baku at the beginning of October this year, being the first milestone of this interesting collaboration. To conclude, we have an immense opportunity ahead of us for development, and also several possibilities to catch these opportunities. Contributions like the GEGSLA framework or research studies like the ones conducted by the Space Economy Evolution Lab at the Bocconi School of Management in Milan have to be the reference starting point for the concrete development of the governance, expansion, and evolution of the whole space sector. In September 2024, the UN will host the Summit of the Future. What a better occasion to further discuss, analyze, and deepen the contributions that are emerging. I believe that we should take excellent examples like the framework to expedite the process of identifying schemes for a modernized approach to space governance. The moment to act is now. The road to be followed is traced. We are able to succeed in complex challenges, but we always have to prove it to ourselves. I want to remember President Kennedy and his speech at the Rice University in 1962. We do these things not because they're easy, but because they are really hard. Thank you very much for listening.
We thank Simonetta Di Pipo for her very interesting approach. She's very experienced with the United Nations system, with many international endeavors. And her speech was really not only interesting, but important and insightful. Now I want to give the floor to Stuart Clark. As I said, he's representing the Earth Space Sustainability Initiative. Stuart, you have the floor. Please give your insights.
Thank you, Dorin, and thank you so much to the GEGSLA and the MVA for inviting me to participate today. It is an extreme privilege to do so. So as Dorin says, the Earth and Space Sustainability Initiative that I'm representing today, it's a UK initiative funded by the UK Space Agency. And what it seeks to do is to look holistically at the life cycle of a spacecraft. And specifically in this case, we are initially thinking of satellites in Earth orbit, and to split that lifetime into 10 principles. So starting from design and manufacture through launch, the kind of fuels and propulsion that are being used, space operations, space debris mitigation, end of life, keeping the skies dark, keeping the skies quiet as well, and spectrum allocation, Earth monitoring activities, and then re-entry and demise as well. And the organization aims to research what standards there are in the world at the moment, and then where there are gaps in those standards, work with industry and academia to understand best practice and try to transform the initial ideas. Dorin mentioned the Memorandum of Principles, which set out in June of this year these 10 sectors and the kinds of thinkings that we were having about them at the time, and to flesh these out into much larger documents and then widely consult on these. And then once we have received as many inputs as we can possibly get, redraft so that we can achieve consensus, and then we start the process of we're in advanced negotiations with the British Standards Institute to see how we can transform the principles themselves into standards that hopefully can be internationally and widely recognized. And where the reason for going this route is that we believe, rather like Giuseppe mentioned at the beginning of this, that standardization is a route to access for people. So we have an even playing field. We know if they're correctly tensioned standards, they're not exclusionary, but people know where to start and how to get involved in this process, and how to set up companies that can easily feed into supply chains. So that's the brief of our Earth Space Sustainability Initiative. And whilst we are particularly focused on the Earth orbital environment at the moment, we do have a strand looking at resources and defining what those kinds of resources are, whether those are literally physical space in an orbit, or indeed physical space on a celestial object, or the amount of spectrum frequency that you need to operate your spacecraft, and how we can correctly and equitably manage all of that. And so the goal is to run this research program for 2 years. and roughly with a cadence of every 6 months, present a new fleshed out sustainability principle into the wild, as it were, to consult with as many stakeholders as we can. So that concludes my introduction, and back to you, Doran.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you very much. We appreciate very much the points of view expressing by you, representing the Earth Space Sustainability Initiative. It's really very important to get together all these organizations, institutions, and to work together and to define the framework of the United Nations, a much broader understanding of the lunar governance and management of the activities on the moon. Now, Alice Gorman. Hello, Alice. It's late night in Australia, but I hope, Alice, it's online. Yes.
Here I am.
Okay, Alice, Associate Professor at Flinders University in Australia, Faculty of the International Space University, and Vice Chair of Academia in the GEGSLA. Alice, you have the floor. Please express your points of view and your views.
Thank you, Doran. I'm going to put some slides on the screen, but while I'm getting those up, I would like to follow the Australian tradition and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you tonight from the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I acknowledge their deep and ongoing connections to their lands, waters, and skies. And I also extend my respects to the elders of any traditional owner communities where our audience might be joining us from today. So I want to talk briefly about a little bit about the background to sustainable development and how our work on the moon intersects with this. So a major goal of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is to manage the Earth's environment well in order to reduce inequalities, to eradicate poverty, and to achieve a whole range of social goods. And an aspect of this is actually how we get and use data from the moon to contribute to these goals of making a better Earth. So in the 1960s and 70s, the English economist Barbara Ward was a major force in promoting the idea of sustainable development. In 1972, she actually founded the International Institute for Environment and Development and is held to have provided some of the best definitions of sustainability in terms of continuing practices that can benefit future generations. In 1966, she published an interesting book called Spaceship Earth. And this book promoted the idea that the Earth was a closed habitat, very fragile and vulnerable, floating in the inky blackness of space. And this view was inspired very much by the 1968 Earthrise photograph, which is also argued to have kicked off environmental movements on Earth, again, providing that idea that the Earth was extremely fragile and vulnerable and needed to be properly cared for. In 1973, which is exactly 50 years ago this year, she published an essay in the UNESCO Courier called Only One Earth. And in it, she said, "Above all, we are the generation to see through the eyes of the astronauts the astonishing Earthrise of our small and beautiful planet above the barren horizons of the moon. Indeed, we in this generation would be some kind of psychological monstrosity if this were not an age of intense, passionate, committed debate and search." So 50 years later, perhaps we haven't quite seen the results of such passionate and committed debate and search as we might have liked, but this is the opportunity that presents itself to us right now at this point in time. So I want to have a quick look at some of the ways in which studying the moon actually contributes to what we can do with the terrestrial environment. In 1957, 1958, There was the International Geophysical Year, which is well known for creating the opportunity for the launch of the first satellite, Sputnik 1. But there are a number of programs in the International Geophysical Year that were directly related to the moon. One of these, which is not very well known, was the Markowitz Moon Camera Program, which was initiated by William Markowitz in the US Naval Research Observatory. He developed a special camera that you could use to photograph the moon in relationship to the stars. And one of the rationales for this was to increase the accuracy of timekeeping on Earth, to study the rotation of the Earth, and in particular variations in its rotation, irregularities in its rotation, and also contributed to defining the geoid, which is basically if you take the oceans off the Earth and then balance it out gravitationally, you end up with a kind of sort of a lumpy looking piece of fruit, I guess. So these were all key aspects of learning to understand the Earth better, which is one of the reasons for having the International Geophysical Year to begin with. So this was one of many programs which actually incorporated lunar data into improving our knowledge of the Earth. A later project, one which is ongoing, was the placing of laser retroreflectors on the moon. So the first of these went up with the Apollo 11 mission in 1969. Retroreflectors were also placed by the Apollo 15 and 17 missions, as well as 2 Russian rovers. And most recently, the Chandrayaan 3 mission has placed a retroreflector on the moon. Every day, lasers are shot towards these retroreflectors, and the time it takes them to return tells us how far away the moon is. And this is how we know that the moon is retreating from the Earth at a distance of about 3.8 centimeters every year. So this is an ongoing scientific experiment for which we have over 50 years of data. Now that everybody is going back to the moon, one of the issues is that we might lose access to some of these historic retroreflectors and the data they can provide, because disturbances in the lunar regolith, in the dust that is created by surface activities, could actually occlude the surfaces of the retroreflectors and prevent us from continuing to use them. And this is where I want to draw this back to the GEGSLA's recommended framework document. So in our section on lunar environmental management in relation to cultural and natural heritage, the principle 6.2.11 basically states that if there is any reason to think some surface activity on the moon could cause an adverse effect to any sites of natural or cultural heritage, consultation should take place, and in order to ensure the continuing survival of these places. So this applies to the retroreflectors. And this is a key part of science that takes place on the moon. And in the GEGSLA recommended framework, we have started to put together the principles of how we might manage disturbance to these and other places. So something the recommended framework addresses is how we can continue to access lunar science. And we also strongly acknowledge in this document that it's no longer spaceship Earth. We can no longer think of the Earth as this little isolated capsule floating in space. We now should be thinking of the Earth and Moon as part of the same system, and trying to be understanding not just how the Earth operates in order to further the SDGs relating to environment and climate change, but to be promoting the understanding of the entire Earth-Moon system. And our recommended framework contributes to our ability to do that. So that's it from me. I will stop sharing my screen and pass back to you, Doran.
Thank you very much, Alice. Indeed, Earth and Moon represents one environment. We have to understand that the moon is not alone by itself. The Earth together with the moon form one entity, and we have to have this approach in the future. Now I give the floor to Jean-Claude Worms. He's the Executive Director of COSPAR, the Committee on Space Research, and as well as co-chair of the GEGSLA Working Group 1, Lunar Environmental Protection. Jean-Claude, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dorian. My screen got all messed up, so I need to find my controls back. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second, please. Yes, here I am. So greetings, everyone, and thank you, GEGSLA, for having me here. I've been introduced properly. Enough said about that. The other co-chair of this Working Group 1 on lunar environmental protection is Ian Crawford, the renowned lunar scientist. And we've been tasked with discussing and agreeing on key focus areas to safeguard and preserve the lunar environment for sustainable human activities. As said, I'm also the executive director of COSPAR, and there is a direct relation in terms, for instance, of planetary protection. I will talk about that. I was previously the CEO of the European Science Foundation. The work of the Working Group 1 is only starting now. We have had a first meeting last week or this week. So although I will strive to present and represent all views in a balanced manner, I will essentially speak in my own name today. So my other colleagues have started to present the case for incorporating the discussion regarding the moon exploration in the broader context of environmental protection, meaning environmental protection of the Earth, and therefore of enforcing and achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And indeed, it's been argued brilliantly by Dorian and others that several, if not all, maybe, of the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, benefit from space activities one way or another. The point I would like to concentrate in this during these few minutes of introduction concerns how we could try and ensure sustainable exploration and use of outer space and, of course, of the moon. Indeed, Giuseppe started at the beginning by saying that despite numerous reports, studies, input from very different actors over the years, there is no international coordination mechanism for lunar activities of all these actors. And I would argue that sustainability of space exploration implies agreeing on regulations. And that means everybody, all the actors concerned, should agree on regulation. And of course, the UN have a role to play here, a fundamental role. So from the science perspective, scientists are one component, I could say, but one component of exploration initiatives, even though some might sometimes think that they should have the cosmos should be their restricted playground, free from interference from all other actors. However, if we want to ensure that future science can be conducted on and around celestial bodies and in interplanetary space, these environments, as Alice was just pointing out for other reasons, need to be preserved to an extent that is depending on the characteristics of the body, atmosphere, water, and on what is being researched. And if we don't do this properly, future science, and with it, the hope of understanding such basic questions as the origin and evolution of our solar system and the universe will be compromised. So to carry out this role in a responsible manner, scientists and COSPAR have been defining planetary protection guidelines since the early 60s. This means that there is a specially appointed COSPAR panel, the PPP, Panel on Planetary Protection, with independent scientists being appointed and duly accredited representatives of relevant space agencies, as well as an ex officio member from the UN, COPIOS. And the panel concerns itself with biological interchange during solar system exploration and use, including what we call forward contamination, so possible effect of contamination by terrestrial organisms of planets other than the Earth, planetary satellites as well, and contamination of the Earth by materials returned from outer space carrying potential extraterrestrial organisms, so backward contamination. And the primary objective of the panel is to develop, promulgate, and maintain clearly delineated policies that provide specific requirements as to the standards that must be achieved to protect against the harmful effects of such contamination. I just mentioned harmful effects. I will come back to that. We update this policy and guidelines continuously. The last time was in 2021 for the moon, by defining regions where PPA rules could be relaxed and where they would be reinforced. And of course, this was in response to requests from industry, for instance, saying, well, currently the planetary protections guidelines forbid us to do anything. So we studied where they could do a few things and where they should be extra careful. And so this is something that we continue doing. But there are other actors, as I said. And exploration for science is one aspect, use is another aspect. And they are sometimes conflicting for obvious reasons. Several governments and industrial actors now wish to step in and start using low Earth orbit, cislunar space, and the moon's surface, and they should be allowed to do this. That's fair enough, up to a point. The use of space should be done in a way that is considerate of the environment, of the impact of activities on this environment, and also on the other actors' assets. The only way to do that is to work together and agree on an acceptable framework. And by that, we mean, of course, a framework acceptable by all parties. To me, at least one recent model for such a dialogue was the way in which the International Astronomical Union dealt with the matter of light pollution of the night sky from constellation of satellites by telecommunication companies. And the way they did that was by incorporating these companies upfront in the dialogue, in the working groups, by having them talk to scientists to try and solve the issue together. And from what I saw, everyone basically made a testimony of being good steward of the space environment. And of course, this should be checked by appropriate regulations, as I said. There are several platforms where this could be discussed. GEGSLA and the recommended framework is, of course, a main one. COSPAR can help there, and there are other platforms as well. But again, I repeat, everyone must be a good steward of the space environment, and we need to define these rules together. So what's to be done? I think this has been said by someone previously. The legal instruments that are existing already, and by that I mean essentially the Outer Space Treaty, because the Moon Treaty has not been ratified by most, let's say, nations conducting lunar exploration. So they should be refined because the terms, for instance, that are used in the OST 67 are not clear enough in many aspects. For instance, what is meant by harmful contamination or harmful interference? Is it harmful to other actors only operating on the moon, or is it harmful to the moon itself? And of course, this makes a big difference. The UN has, of course, a major role to play in the elaboration of these definitions and regulations. I am not a jurist or a lawyer, so my proposal may be scoffed at, but I argue that using a kind of ethical or philosophical framework to guide discussions leading to future legislation could be useful. And for that, I would ask whether could all actors agree on this ethical framework guiding future legislation. Of course, this is not about real laws, but I want to introduce the so-called 3 laws of space exploration as such a framework. I don't have a lot of time to go through the details, but you can find the reference here. I'll be happy to share the publication with you. The idea is to introduce, on the model of Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, the 3 laws of space exploration, which prioritize basically the interest first of space exploration, search for knowledge, then science and technology, actors and then the assets of the various actors. Of course, as I said, I will say it again,
Jean-Claude, I don't have sound. Your image just freezed. Jean-Claude, do you listen to me? So I think Jean-Claude has to connect once again. It had a problem, a technical problem. Okay, Jean-Claude, are you connected? Your microphone is off. Jean-Claude, your microphone is off. Okay.
I'm very sorry about that. I got disconnected at the worst moment. I don't know where I stopped.
3 minutes ago.
Okay, so have you heard about the laws of exploration? yet or not? Or was I cut off before that?
We saw your slide with the 3 laws before you got cut off.
Yeah, you just
okay, so I'll share them again.
Please,
I'll share them again and possibly go backwards once. And I was saying that basically, sure enough, Asimov realized that sometimes mankind prevailed over individuals and introduced the zero laws of robotics, where robots had to care first about humanity before they could think of individuals. And so I am doing the same with the laws of space exploration by introducing the zeros law, where space exploration agents must endeavor to protect scientific progress and humanity's above all, meaning that in some cases, this would be prevalent over even scientific exploration of the bodies or of the various assets of the various actors. Again, I can provide you with the details of these laws, but I will stop here. And sorry about the cutoff.
Any other considerations, or do you stop?
Yes, I will stop now. I've taken too long already. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jean-Claude. Thank you very much. We have seen what is the relation of science with operators, and we learn also about some ethical problems and the involvement of international organizations like the UN and necessity to be involved. Okay, now we start some discussions. Let me put you some questions. By instance, how is GEGSLA engaging with stakeholders from non-space sectors, such as environment organizations, to raise awareness about lunar sustainability? If you have more specific insights about it, please, Stuart, Alice, Jean-Claude, what's your opinion?
I can jump in and just start, Doreen, with a general comment, actually, about the need for communications here, because I think this is absolutely vital, especially now for the moon. It's so important for us to remember, and I think this everyone who's watching this knows this already, but I'm going to say it anyway. Every sighted human being who is alive today and who has ever lived has seen the moon. It's our common cultural heritage. And so what we do with it and how we decide to use it and govern it in the future, everyone here is a stakeholder. And that's not just the astronomers that want to use it, or the geologists that want to use it for science, or the companies that want to use it to provide services to governmental bases or beam services back to the Earth. So everyone who looks up in the night sky and sees the moon is a stakeholder in what we should do. And so the aspects of a wide communications campaign to the general public, making them aware that this change is coming. And obviously not everyone is going to want to engage and will have a point of view on it, but it is behoven to us to actually do that work, to actually communicate that a big change in the way we perceive the moon and use the moon, and the way we link the Earth and the moon together, is coming. And so I think if I can return it to the work of the MVA and their communications arm, and especially the International Moon Day itself, the work that is going on here in the GEGSLA needs translating into interesting ways to communicate that with the general public, and then very widely disseminated. And it's a two-way street. We then have to listen to anyone who wants to talk to us, so that we can fold that back into our future discussions and understand what people think about this use of the moon.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Any other panelist wants to add something? Yes, Jean-Claude.
I fully subscribe to what Stuart just said. I think it's very important to relate to society and how they perceive what we're trying to do here. One of the things that COSPAR has done in the past couple of years is to try, we have started, it's only starting, is to try to incorporate a dose of social sciences and humanities into a world dominated by rocket scientists and engineers. This has been a revolution for us, of course, first by learning to talk to different people and use different languages and different approaches. But we have done that by creating a panel on social sciences and humanities. And one of the first things that they have started to discuss is precisely that. How do we relate what we're doing? How do we explain what we're doing? And how do we collect? It's not just about a vessel for communicating our science. It's also how do we get from the other side that will be useful for our science, for translating the importance of our science to decision makers and to politicians. So yes, fully agree, Stuart.
Thank you, Jean-Claude.
I might add.
Yes, please, Alice.
As Stuart said as well, we have to be prepared for what people think. And I have to say, in my experience, people tend to be a bit horrified at the thought that there might be commercial activities on the moon, or that actual mining is going to take place. So we can't ignore that. You know, we have to take that stuff on board. And I think every time a mission is launched, there's a lot of news, there's a lot of publicity. People are aware that's going on, but they're not necessarily aware of the implications, like that this is opening a doorway to, as Simonetta said, you know, this is a new phase of lunar exploration. I think the sort of general public of Earth, to generalize at a very large level, is interested in accountability. And I think we have to demonstrate that we have the means of justifying and accounting for our actions. And this is something where the GEGSLA's framework, I think, is important, because it provides principles that we can use to assess the degree to which a lunar mission or a lunar operation can actually account for itself in a way that the public will accept. And if we want continued funding for scientific and other kinds of lunar missions, we are relying to a degree in the support of governments and the support of taxpayers as well. So we do owe something to them. And I don't like the term echo chamber or, you know, bubbles. I think they're actually completely, they misdescribe the phenomena that they are supposed to be complaining about. But it is so important that we don't just talk to ourselves. I think another critical factor of the GEGSLA has been engaging with industry and continually encouraging industry to be part of the process. We have a number of other very good high-level principles documents, such as the Hague building blocks. But in our group, because we have the capacity to get that level of feedback, which again is not always can be quite critical, but it does give us, I think, a strong platform to ensure that we have some really robust ideas that are going to get a strong buy-in from the sort of general community of people interested in the moon.
Thank you, Alice. Coming from some views expressed by you, I address you, all three panelists, one more question. You know, now you're seeing on the moon, they act a lot of private and official governmental entities. What are the key challenges in ensuring that lunar activities remain peaceful and collaborative in the face of increasing interest from both states and commercial entities? Some opinions?
Maybe I'll
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, Alice, please.
I think we need very clear and detailed regulation, which I know is not popular with industry. But
right.
I think this is, if we don't have that, we will see conflict arising over all kinds of possibly things that appear to be relatively trivial. So I think regulation is the key here, and we do it on Earth in terrestrial industry, and I don't see why just because we're apparently far away on a body which people think doesn't have an ecology. I disagree with that as well. I don't see why lunar operators should think they will not be required to do similar things on the moon. That's my opinion.
Yes, that's right. Please, Jean-Claude.
Can I add to that I am not sure that the main issue would come from industry here. Industry doesn't like regulations. Okay, yes. But if the countries agree on regulations, industry will use that. I mean, they will abide by it, and they will try, of course, to go around it, but they will abide by it. The main issue to me are states, and the fact that, as I said a moment ago, the wording of the Outer Space Treaty in many areas is not sufficiently clear, and we need to clarify that. It's not clear, for instance, I mean, basic principles have been agreed for obvious reason. We needed a consensus in 1967, and the only way to get a consensus was to remain generic. And so, yes, peaceful uses of outer space, non-proliferation of weapons, of nuclear weapons, etc., etc. And those probably will not happen, at least not happen in an obvious way. So what will happen, though, is all the loopholes in the treaty will allow a number of actors, member states, up front to do things on the moon that have not been, sufficiently clarified in advance, like establish a base, then say, of course, we're not appropriating the lunar soil, but this is our base, and of course, you cannot enter in this space for security reasons. What then? What do they do then? Who controls what will be done on that base? And so it's all these potential loopholes and then clarity of the legal language in OST that, to me, poses problem.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree with I agree with both Alice and Jean-Claude very strongly on both those points, and want to suggest as well that if we can understand what sustainability looks like on the moon, and we understand what is truly sustainable, what isn't, and therefore how to measure that, to turn it into metrics, so that we can actually have a system even of standards by which companies and state actors are bound to within. Hopefully that de-escalates the chances of conflict, because then the rules are clear, and people who break those rules, it's also clear that that's what's happening. I feel quite strongly that that conflict arises when resources are scarce and rules for use of those resources aren't clearly in place. The chance for conflict goes up in those situations. Also, once we have those kinds of rules, we the flip side of regulation is finding ways to incentivize good behavior as well. And so at the Earth and Space Sustainability Initiative, we are running a set of consultations with the finance and the insurance industry to discover from them what reduces their risk when they decide whether to invest or to insure in a space project. And we're finding from them that if we can understand what a sustainable presence and activity in Earth orbit is, for example, then that can help them have more confidence in financing or insuring that company, which is obviously to the advantage of that company.
Thank you very much, Stuart. As I'm informed, our Master of Ceremony, Saba El Shawa, collected some more questions. I give you the floor, Saba, for addressing more questions within this panel.
Thank you, Doran. Thank you to all of our panelists for this really insightful discussion and presentations. The question I wanted to pose is, how can countries with emerging space programs or potentially non-spacefaring countries actively participate in these lunar sustainability efforts, especially considering the potential resource constraints that they have?
Well, something that we have discussed as part of the GEGSLA framework is a concept that a mature space actor might partner with an emerging space country or organization in order to transfer capability and skills, to provide opportunities for them to develop that kind of expertise and to sort of carry out joint missions. As that was something that was an idea that was quite favorably received when we discussed it in the GEGSLA meetings.
Another aspect of the question, although it doesn't immediately solve the issue, is to make sure that the various platforms can support capacity building in said countries. A number of organizations are doing that. COSPAR is doing it, IAU is doing it, GEGSLA recommends that as well. And of course, making sure that, let's say, the big space nations can dedicate resources in training early career scientists and other people in various countries, enable the development of a workforce and of a trained workforce, also of facilities. And this is something that takes time, but is extremely important.
Yes, indeed. And if I can bring it back to communications here as well, it's about talking to these countries, and these countries also not being afraid to speak up as well. So we need all of these fora that we have for communications and more of them, and we need to take that conversation out so that we can all together understand what we collectively want to do in space, what our ambitions are, and how we can work together. I see the moon and the ideas and the discussions of lunar governance as one of the big global topics. I hesitate to call it a problem, but in the same way we must all come together for climate change and understanding and working towards that, we must also all come together to understand how we want to move forward with the moon.
Perhaps if I could add something to this as well. So it's not necessarily those relationships between what we sometimes call spacefaring nations and emerging space nations, but within a nation, and I'll use Australia as an example, Indigenous people tend to be very under-resourced in terms of their ability to access education and participate in these industries. And I'm sure other countries would have similar inequities or divisions. So certainly something else that this was also a topic of discussion for the GEGSLA, how we engage more with Indigenous communities to do that. And I think this comes back to what you've been saying, Stuart. We have to be able to demonstrate some, we have to be able to communicate and demonstrate some benefit from that participation and provide conditions to facilitate it. And that's certainly something we're working on in Australia, and I'd like to see a lot more of here. And I'm sure there are other places where there are excellent initiatives taking place as well.
Yes, if I can just quickly reply to that, Alice. I mean, again, I fully 100% support that. And in fact, in the Earth and Space Sustainability Initiative, we are just developing a program to engage with Indigenous communities, because our initial work in this direction has shown that Indigenous concepts and Indigenous knowledge can actually unlock modern concepts of sustainability, and they have a key role. The Indigenous knowledge has a key role now to play in how we define modern sustainability, and it's vital, therefore, that we work together. So it's great, obviously, to hear that GEGSLA is looking at this as well. Earth Space Sustainability Initiative is actively looking at this, and I hope if we were to, once we get to the Summit of the Future this time, sort of next year, we will have had those conversations and workshops, in fact, to progress these ideas and interlock these knowledge systems with one another.
Fantastic.
If I may add something, as it was presented in the introduction by Giuseppe Baldi, GEGSLA, and within MVA, we have a program for emerging space country. And we try to accommodate these questions of involving emerging countries in lunar activities. Of course, they may start from the basic things, research, taking part in space programs, and then being involved with ideas, with solutions for developing even infrastructure together with developed countries for lunar activities. Some specialists for developing countries are very well prepared and they progress very well, and they could bring their initiatives and their countries up to the moon, I could say. Okay, Saba, please continue with questions if there are more.
Yes, thank you, Doran. I think you all brought up two really important points that resonated, and the first being indigenous knowledge, and Stuart, you mentioned also how this has parallels with climate change being, a challenge that all of humanity is tackling together. I do see so many parallels with also lunar and space exploration as a challenge for all humanity to work together and include groups that have traditional knowledge that may help us in this as well. And as Doran also mentioned, we do have the Emerging Space Countries program in the Moon Village Association. I personally was involved in this program, leading the Jordan team, and it does relate to also what Alice mentioned about being able to show that there are direct benefits from space exploration for life on Earth. Because for countries who do not have an established space program or necessarily the capacity to, explore the moon for the sake of exploring the moon, it is really essential to communicate again the potential benefits. And so my next question brings the conversation back to kind of the idea of preserving the lunar environment, but also how the lunar environment is tied to the Earth environment. We heard a few times today from our panelists and speakers that we should look at the moon and Earth as one ecosystem. So could you give us more insight into how exactly we can preserve the lunar environment and how the interplay between the lunar and Earth ecosystems is actually important for even non-space actors?
Perhaps I can start briefly. I will not elaborate too much on the dual ecosystem. I'm not really the expert here, but on the matter of preserving, I think we have this issue that if we consider, and I think that's the case today, that there are various actors interested by going to the moon and potentially using the moon, and that maybe we will not be in a position to prevent that, even though we would want to, then we have to find a way, an innovative way, of preserving areas that are important for science and cultural heritage and allowing use, and I hesitate to use the term exploitation, but let's say use of the moon in other areas. And that's actually the way that COSPAR has tried to address the matter for the moon. I hasten to add, this is very different for Mars. This is very different for Jovian satellites or satellites of Saturn's or other places in the solar system. But for the moon, atmosphereless, we thought that we could, based on the available scientific evidence today, restrict, let's say, human exploration and disturbance of the lunar areas in portions of the moon, very, very small portions, actually, a few percent of the moon, what we call the permanently shadowed region and the poles. where there is evidence of existing water there. So we want to preserve that. And so the idea was to reinforce the regulation to not go there and try not to impact these areas by, dust and exhaust plumes and things like that from rockets. But on the other hand, allow maybe in a more relaxed fashion exploration and use in most of the surface of the moon, actually. So that's the way we did it. But as I said, it's very different for other places in the solar system. If you want to go to Enceladus, basically what we say is hands off. So I don't expect the scientists to say anything else than hands off for a number of years to come in these areas.
As Jean-Claude said, so the resources of the moon are limited, especially the water. Of course, there is a lot of ice on the South Pole, but it's a limited resources. It's not renewable. And in the same time, we learn a lot in protecting the Earth. We made in the beginning a lot of mistakes. We consider the space infinite, and we let the space debris invade us in outer space. We didn't protect the Earth properly, but now we know what to do on another celestial body. We have to apply from the very beginning very strict regulations and protect the moon, and to leave it for exploitation and exploration for the next generations. Okay, if somebody else wants to add something.
I wouldn't mind adding something. So I dropped the link to the GEGSLA recommended framework into the chat. And chapter 6 deals specifically with natural and cultural environment management. So it's, I think, has some genuinely new and more developed principles than you see in some of the other documents on this topic. Cultural heritage management is relatively, I say relatively, but kind of straightforward, because most terrestrial principles are easily transferred to the moon. We just need a process and an international sort of agreement on going forward with that. I think one of the challenges, though, is because the moon has traditionally been seen as a dead world, although our increased knowledge of the lunar environment is making us aware that there are things like water cycles and other environmental and ecological cycles that happen on the moon. And of course, our GEGSLA member, Ian Crawford, co-chair of the Environment Working Group with Jean-Claude, is a fantastic researcher in this area. But one thing I think is poorly developed is how to characterize lunar landscapes and how to characterize their values. And, we've probably all seen the 1969 and other Apollo videos of astronauts walking on the moon. We have this idea of this very monotone, duotone landscape that appears to have no color, that appears to be less complex than terrestrial environments that we're used to. So we haven't yet given enough thought to how we characterize aesthetic values and geological values, I think. And in my view, we need to develop a new vocabulary for talking about lunar landscapes and for understanding what their heritage, natural heritage values are and cultural heritage values are. And in the heritage management world, we no longer separate natural and cultural in the way that they used to be done. So I think this is a challenge for us now. We're gaining a much greater scientific understanding of the moon, and as more missions go there, that knowledge is going to increase exponentially. But we also need to be able to describe and characterize these places so in a way which allows us to make good decisions about what we need to do to ensure as little harmful contamination or harmful interference as we can.
To complete, sorry, go ahead, Stuart.
No, please carry on, Jean.
I just wanted to add to what Alice said. To be complete, there are scientists who believe that the current status of the PPP categories as promulgated by COSPAR are too lenient, for instance, as concerns the moon. Jan, I think, is one of those scientists who believe we should be stricter in elaborating these guidelines for the moon. So the debate is not closed even amongst the scientific world.
Well, I have I suppose it's a question, really, more than a point to make. And I literally don't know the answer to whether this has been looked at and whether we should be concerned about it or not. But one of the things that I have been surprised about to learn relatively recently in the context of dark skies from Earth and satellite reflections. Most of the work and the problems, I thought, were coming from the specular reflections of the satellites crossing fields of view and things like that. I now understand that there is a growing problem of diffuse sky brightening as well, because of much smaller pieces of space debris, and that these can severely impact nocturnal natural systems, for example, and diurnal natural systems. So my question really is about the lunar and the cislunar dust environment, and whether with a large increase of operations at the moon, we will contribute dust to that cislunar environment and brighten the Earth's dark skies even more, and which will then have a knock-on effect to the natural systems and ecosystems on the Earth. So I don't have a feel for the figures, whether it's sort of negligible what we're talking about or significant. But I think if my ignorance displays anything, it's that there's a number of emerging questions that the more we understand, the more work we perhaps have to do to try to fully foresee these consequences. And that's why this kind of research, the GEGSLA work, is crucial at the moment, so that we can understand the potential ramifications of what we're doing. We've all seen the terrible trouble that the petrochemical industry has got themselves into, because they didn't look far enough ahead at the consequences of what was happening. And here's our chance to avoid those kinds of things for the moon, whatever those things might turn out to be.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Yes, Alice, you want? Please,
Such
Alice.
an interesting question. There's a reverse side to that as well, because there is evidence that suggests that enough surface activity on the moon kicking up dust can potentially loft enough of it into orbit to create a cloud around the moon. So your point is the moon could become brighter and upset the light balance on which so many species on Earth, engage with and depend on. But we could also, and I know what you said, like the Earth is getting brighter. The Earth is emitting more light because of the reflection from these particles. But the consequences, if we actually have a cloud of dust around the moon, how that will affect light as well, I think, is a big issue. So I think you're raising some really interesting things here, and Jean-Claude probably knows more about it than both of us.
I'm not sure about that, but there is also the matter of transport of that dust across large portions of the moon's surface, which could cause problems to human explorers as well, as that dust is probably toxic if it gets into the suits and things. But also, going to places where they're not supposed to go, like one of these permanently shadowed regions. And for that, we need more research about the transport mechanisms and the way that the dust is being transported. So these are parts. But there are other aspects as well that we're starting to discover just now, linked to debris in general. All the space agencies around the world are looking at ways to alleviate the problem of debris, whether it's around the Earth or other places. And one of the initiatives, I think at ESA's level, was designed to, how do you pronounce DMISE? Demise?
Yes.
Designed to demise. approach, and that might not be without problem, because by doing that, you actually create an addition of material that is burned up in the stratosphere and maybe impacting the ozone layer and other stuff. So I mean, yeah, all these issues need to be looked at. GEGSLA is of course taking that into account in the framework. The COSPA panel on the detrimental activities in space is also looking at these issues, and it's not just about debris around the Earth; it's also cislunar debris.
Yes, but also we have to touch the problem of the harmful interference and also of the protection of the far side of the moon for radio astronomy. If we start to radiate, to use a lot of frequencies around the moon, we could really stop the specialists to have very clear and deep sky information from radio astronomy. Because indeed, the far side of the moon is the best place, the ideal place to place such instruments to look deep into space without any interference. We have to keep it clean. Okay, Saba, you have. Okay, Jean-Claude, please.
I may disappoint people being a scientist, but I think that honestly, there is zero chance that we could forbid the various exploration agents, industry, governments for not using communication satellites around the moon. And so the way to do precisely what you're suggesting, Dorian, might be to adopt the approach that we have here on Earth by having discussions at the ITU level, by allowing certain frequency bands to be protected, so that radio astronomers and other users could still do their work while not being too much impacted by communication satellites and other uses of the spectrum. I think that's the only way we could do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the more realistic approach. So thank you. Sure. Saba, you have more questions?
Yeah, I think with a lot of the points that you brought up, in terms of looking forward at how we're using these resources, which is something that maybe we failed to plan very well here on Earth. It is directly related to the SDG of responsible consumption and production. And I do see that being related to now the in situ resource utilization, or ISRU, of the potential resources on the moon. So the question is, what can you elaborate on the role of ISRU, first in its potential to support sustainable lunar activities, but also in how potentially the GEGSLA framework guidelines could contribute to regulating that in a way that does maintain sustainability of lunar resources?
Humbly pass my turn here.
Please, Jean-Claude, you have the
floor. No. I wanted to say that I will not reply. I don't
okay.
I don't have the answer to that.
Anybody else?
I have to remember the detail of the GEGSLA document, which is very thorough. So I don't have anything immediately to say around that, except I suppose ISRU is required. Like, we're not going to develop a lunar economy or a more permanent habitation without having the means to use local resources. And well, in fact, I do have something to say. So some of the things emphasized, in order to responsibly use those resources and avoid creating more problems than we can deal with, something that the recommended framework emphasizes is information sharing, the creation of common standards, interoperability, so that people aren't duplicating infrastructure. And I suppose this relates to spectrum as well. Everyone doesn't need their own satellite constellations in lunar orbit. We don't need the ones we've got in Earth orbit right now, in my opinion, but that's another question. So enabling the exchange, or the everybody's ability to use the same infrastructure will minimize the amount of disturbance we create, the amount of resources that we use, and also facilitate emergency situations as well. Where people aren't, how do I put this delicately? I don't know, like people aren't going to be dying on the surface of the moon because they're unable to plug their USB stick into the thing that gives them some water. That's a terrible example, but you know what I mean. So the ideas of interoperability and standardization, as Stuart has talked about, are certainly not new, but there are significant issues to overcome, particularly in terms of proprietary information and commercial in confidence information. But in our recommended framework, we see these things as critical to that responsible use of lunar resources.
Thank you.
Doran, do you think that's an adequate characterization of our position?
Yes, that's right. That's right. You are very right. Saba, if we have more questions, let's continue. If not, maybe you have some considerations. You are also specialist, so you are not member of the panel, but you are the master of ceremony. So please have the initiative to. I thank the speakers for now as moderator. I thank Stuart Clark, Alice Gorman, Jean-Claude Worms, and I give the floor to Saba. Saba, she could have more considerations and some conclusions.
Thank you, Doran. Thank you so much for that. Also, I think there's been a lot of really interesting discussion in this panel. And from my perspective, kind of bringing it back to the Sustainable Development Goals, especially, I think it's important to note that when we talk about lunar activities, the activities on the moon themselves are not necessarily going to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals specific targets. But by pursuing lunar exploration and by doing it in a sustainable way, we are also developing our technologies in a way that could be beneficial for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals on Earth. And with obviously through my role in GEGSLA, I've been able to interact with a lot of experts on this topic and learn a lot, but also with my work in Jordan, being, a country with not a space program or any sort of, goals for space exploration that maybe the big players have. It has been really important, as Stuart mentioned, focusing on the communication aspect and really making those links for people. Because I think in the space industry, we often say, space helps with sustainability, space helps with the SDGs. But you really have to be a bit more specific than that and show exactly how it's supposed to help. And I think it has the potential to do that, but it also has the potential to cause damage. Jean-Claude mentioned the idea of the atmospheric demise of satellites, which is, pushed as this is how to sustainably deal with the problem of space debris. But in fact, we don't even know the impacts that has burning up in the atmosphere. Different layers of the atmosphere have different impacts. And this is something that's still scientists and researchers are working on characterizing. We see also with, the industry push for faster, reusable launchers and being able to do it more frequently. And it's said that this is, it helps with the sustainability of space exploration. But what are the impacts for the Earth environment as well? That's something that we can't really say, this is just a casualty or something that we're going to look past because it's serving the goal of faster space exploration. So I think from my perspective, it's really finding the balance and really trying to identify these links more clearly, especially for people who are not part of the space industry. And I think a lot of the points that our panelists brought up today, as well as our speakers, they really show that lunar exploration has the potential, but it's our responsibility to make sure that it's done correctly. And so we do have, a bit more time for this discussion. I would like to invite back also our previous speakers, Giuseppe and Ian, if they have anything they would like to add to the discussion. I do have a lot of questions, but I would love to hear your thoughts first on any of the points brought up today and kind of anything you would like to share on this topic.
Ian, go ahead.
Oh, I think, Sab, I'd rather respond to a question than try to do anything unplanned remarks. So sorry. Yeah.
No worries. I do have a question, Ian, that I think would be perfect for you because it's about the role of private companies and also public-private partnerships. The first being, how can private companies be incentivized to adopt sustainable practices? And also, if you have any examples of public-private partnerships that have been working on advancing lunar sustainability goals, what we can learn from these collaborations.
Yeah, thank you. So on incentives, I think safety is the incentive that industry is going to most aptly respond to, right? So when we're talking about industry investments, be them lunar, be them low Earth or orbit constellations, any other type of space activity, there's a lot of investment going into those, and the companies are incentivized to protect that investment. And whether that comes through some regulation, I think in a lot of contexts, industry will, maybe begrudgingly, but will admit that regulation is necessary. And I think in the lunar context, that is one area where a certain amount of regulation will be accepted by industry because it helps protect that investment, helps define the certainty that industry needs, and honestly helps set the rules of competition. Industry wants to know that their competitors are going to be set under the same conditions that they are. So a certain amount of regulation and commonality in international regulation helps that. So safety is kind of where the starting point is, and linking that to protection of investment and certainty in investment is where I would go with that. Yeah, I mean, I would think, regulation, probably they would want light touch regulation, and we may debate how far beyond that we go. But I think there is some level of regulation that industry is willing to accept here. And I would point to, as an example of that, something from another sector. So the on-orbit servicing community. So the idea that you can go up and refuel, repair, maintain satellites. Has put together an industry association called Confers. Confers has put out a number of principles, and we've seen governments start to reflect those principles in regulatory requirements. And so that is an example of how that might occur. Now, again, could go further, but it does happen. And the second part of the question, Saba, sorry, I got myself off on a roll and forgot that part of the question.
No, so it was about how to incentivize and also examples of public-private partnerships. Okay. Yeah, so I think
I mean, the other example of public-private partnerships potentially in the lunar environment is some work that has been done facilitated by NASA, but involves a number of companies called the Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium, and they're working on interoperability and some of the technical standards that the GEGSLA framework is mentioned, and Alice, that you were talking about, is kind of a need for just that basic resource efficiency and use, right? So,
thank you, Ian. I think it's a really important thing to reflect on these examples of successful collaborations and how we can carry them forward into different aspects of lunar exploration. We are coming up on the end of the session, and so I'd like to leave everyone with one question, and you can share any final remarks. Given the focus of our session today, what are some of the immediate and long-term benefits of sustainable lunar activities for life on Earth and for sustainability on Earth? And how can we make these benefits tangible to the general public? Whoever would like to start. It's a big question, I know, so it's your own opinion. Please feel free to share. Yes, Jean-Claude, go ahead.
For science, clearly the possibility that if we do that in a proper and sustainable way, we can continue to do science in the future. And certainly, I mean, I would argue, and maybe other people will argue with me, that this is a desired outcome. Otherwise,
say-
if we don't have this set of sustainable rules, we won't be able to do science in the future, at least not science of the solar system.
So I would say that
Okay, sir.
sorry, Doreen.
Yeah, sorry.
Just from a
Please
personal
don't do it.
from personal point of view, the moon is an almost, shall we say, blank canvas. It's, as we say at International Moon Day, let's make it a laboratory for peace. So it can be an experiment in governance and understanding that is somewhat unshackled from the geopolitics of Earth. Somewhat, I put that in underlined. So it's a place that we can try to understand how we can work in a more or less neutral environment.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Stuart. I wanted to stress quite the same thing. The moon will teach us a lot of things, connecting people, connecting institutions. New regulations will apply, new rules for working on the moon. Of course, we'll make mistakes, but as less as possible. And moon will teach us how to deal on Earth with a lot of other things where the approach was not the proper one from the very beginning. It's my view. Jan, please, you have the hand raised.
Yeah, so Dorian, I was going to say something similar. So I look to the moon to potentially help us solve some of the technical challenges and sustainability that we have not solved here on Earth, because to have sustained presence on the moon will necessitate that you do that in a way that is resource efficient, sustained, and sustainable in its own right, because to supply that indefinitely from the Earth will not be efficient, economically efficient, programmatically efficient, or I'm not a scientist, but I would say probably not scientifically sufficient in the long run either. So, the hope is that technological necessity can help us solve some of the things that we've mucked up down here on the surface. And I think we talk a little bit about that potential in the space economy chapter of the framework. The second part of the question, that I think is even the more difficult, right? Because we in the space community often tend to take our value as being self-evident, and I don't think we're as effective as communicating that to the general public as we might be. And I think that's a challenge to ourselves, is to improve our storytelling, improve our demonstration of results, and interact with a more broader set of interested and affected stakeholders in the public.
Can I pick up on what Ian has just said? Because I think this coming phase of lunar exploration is going to make more of the lunar surface at that human level of seeing it through the eyes of people and robots on the ground. It's going to make it more familiar to us. It's going to change how we think about the moon and how we form attachments to lunar places, and bring the moon closer to us in terms of thinking about it in everyday life. And I think that's sort of socially and symbolically important. And I talked before about how I think the spaceship Earth model is no longer a good way to think about Earth. So I think that the way human responses to the moon in this new phase is likely going to give us a capacity to kind of see ourselves as part of the broader solar system in a way we haven't before, which will make, this stuff won't be sort of all out there somewhere. It'll be closer in our world. It'll be more part of our how we think about our place in the world. And I think that's potentially beneficial in supporting the idea that we're going to use all space resources when we move beyond the moon. This will also be on the model of sustainable use. And I think that kind of emotional human attachment to the place, even though we can't necessarily go there, is something that will broaden our sense, to use a very trite term, just our sense of the sense of our place in the universe. And I think that's important.
Yeah. In any case, we'll be there on the moon with our mind, with instruments, with cameras, with a lot of information translated from the moon, when the people will work there for a permanent, in a permanent basis. And be sure everything will touch a lot of aspects of our life on Earth. Okay, Saba, you have the floor. You are the master of ceremony now. And I think it's time to close the session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Doran. Thank you to all of our speakers. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the conclusion of this really, truly insightful and inspiring event. I would like to briefly reflect on some of the things, the highlights and takeaways from our discussion today, beginning with the presentations from our speakers who shared the motivation behind GEGSLA and its work in the Moon Village Association, as well as the framework itself and its potential relevance to the United Nations and their work. During this panel discussion, our panelists reflected on lunar sustainability and how it doesn't just impact space, but it also influences life on our planet. And so that leaves us with the remark that space isn't just for space experts. It really is a collective effort on behalf of all humanity. And the moon isn't just a celestial body. It's part of our ecosystem, and it's something that we need to protect as well. So if we look back at the question that we posed at the beginning, why should we all care about sustainable lunar activities, especially if you're not involved in space? The answer is, as has been said by many of our panelists today and our speakers, that the moon and the exploration of the moon can hold the answers to some of the most pressing challenges that we have here on Earth, whether it's resource sustainability or advancing scientific knowledge. The lunar exploration provides opportunities for all nations to contribute to a brighter future. So as we close this event, I invite you all to follow GEGSLA on our LinkedIn page. We have a monthly newsletter where we share lunar updates and activities from GEGSLA. And even if you're not part of the space industry, it's a great way to start getting involved. I also encourage you to join GEGSLA as a participant. As our speakers mentioned today, in our current operational phase, it really is open to everyone to join our meetings and to contribute to our work. And once again, I thank everyone, all of our speakers and panelists and everyone who joined us today for being part of this event. And let's continue working together to shape the future of lunar activities and create a more sustainable world on this planet and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, GEGSLA.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good evening.